Tonight is, appreciate everyone coming out. Just wanted to share what we're doing tonight. Tonight is not a debate. Rather, we have, I think, three wonderful guests to reflect on where the left, where progressive liberal politics go from here. And there's, I was talking with my wife, Kathy, at dinner, and the frame that I'd invite you to look at this as, at least the frame that I look at it as, is that any talk of the left is kind of ambiguous. You know, does this country even have a left? And if it does have a left, how come it can never be elected in the legislative process where power is? And how do we build a left in this country? And so tonight, I like our three guests because I admire them all. Kshama Sawant is the Socialist alternative candidate. And I'm stereotyping here, so just go along with me. It's the candidate that is outside the system. It's outside of capitalism. It's a radical call to change the way our society is structured. And she ran a campaign against Frank here, and has made a bit of a name for herself. And so she's here representing, in my mind, a critique of the capitalist system. In the middle, Tim might not like this, but literally Tim is in, and I didn't set these guys up. Notice how they self-selected even. I mean, I think that's great. So Tim is in the middle because Tim, in my mind, has to be both in and out of the system. I admire Real Change. I think it is one of the finest activist groups in the city. I think they are consistent in their value system. I think Tim is a prophetic voice, and if any of you have ever heard him talk about homelessness, he is just absolutely, utterly brilliant. He is a brilliant man. But he also has to play in the system and out of the system. And so it's good that he's in the middle. Frank Chopp has a history with our city. He has a history with us here in Seattle and has done wonderful things outside of the office in terms of homeless and poverty alleviation. But he's now in the system. He's inside that capitalist system. And he's a liberal from Seattle. Probably wouldn't be elected in Spokane, where I lived for a while. Probably wouldn't be elected out of Colfax or Walla Walla, maybe, who knows. But Frank has to do a dance between core values that he has and incremental change, and how do you work with people across the continuum to get anything accomplished whatsoever. Any of you who hold positions of responsibility, or if you want to be a pastor, you'll feel this a little bit, because at some point you've got to hold people together sometimes when they don't share your values or your vision. And so each of our three guests tonight represent different parts of the continuum of the left. And the way that it's set up is I'm going to begin by asking them a cultural values question. And each of them will have about 5 minutes to reflect on that. And then I'm going to ask each of them a question about where does the progressive left go from here, and they're going to reflect on that. And then the real magic of the evening takes place. The real magic is you. This is where democracy happens. You will just self-select. There'll be about 15, 20 minutes where you break into groups of 3 to 5 people, no more than that. And each of you will reflect on those questions as well, because that's democracy in action. It's the start of a conversation. At the end of that, we'll come back. There'll be a time for Q&A. I just want to acknowledge that Tim's got to leave at 8:30. We will end at 8:45, and basically the lights kind of go off about 9:15. So, everybody got it? Thank you for being here. One more thing, just a commercial. And if any of you are interested, I'll show you this afterwards. Ran across this book earlier this year and read it, and I just thought it was pretty brilliant and really liked it and bought it immediately for both of my sons. It's called The Progressive Revolution, How the Best in America Came to Be. It's a history of the progressive movement, and it's really good. And it's also in the Seattle Library if you want to just take it out of the library. So let me begin by asking you, the question is this. And Frank, actually, I'll start with you, and we'll work our way across on this one. This is the cultural values question. On a cultural level, if you would reflect with us for just briefly your impressions about what we're up against today. In this country, there is a 50-50 split in the popular vote, and the real question is, what values bring us together? Are there any?
There are very many, a whole bunch of values that can bring us together, starting with the fundamental concept of loving your fellow human being, as well as making sure that people have a chance to stand up for themselves and to be treated with fairness and justice. And that gets translated into a variety of organizations in our society, ranging from churches to labor unions and many other organizations, nonprofit agencies. Good to see you here tonight, by the way. And because we want to carry out those values that we care for each other and that we're all in this together. Now, what's happening so much at the national level in particular is a real raw divide in this country. Even in this state, you can see it as well. A lot of folks will say they support certain kind of public services to help everybody in this society, whether it's education or home care for the elderly. And yet, in this election, there were several votes where they actually repealed the things that we did on the revenue side. So we have to make sure that when we have our values, that we can figure out a way to translate that into real action and also bring people together. And the key to that is to find a common agenda where we can say, look, these are the 4 or 5 things that we can do together. Let's figure out the best way to get there. And with that, I feel very honored to be with you tonight and look forward to the discussion.
You know, I think that there are several. I think that one of the things that I see over and over again that makes me hopeful is that, you know, people often have ideas that are pretty off base and fear-based about people that they don't have a lot of contact with, you know, whether that be poor people or folks in communities of color, gays, and with familiarity, once people actually get to know folks, you know, once people get to know, for example, the Real Change vendor, once a homeless tent city comes into a community and folks start to understand that, you know, that these aren't just these sort of like walking stereotypes of homeless people, that they're actually living, breathing people, and they're not so different from them, and they get to know them and they make friends with them. And they have a whole different window into something that they thought that they knew all about, and they don't, or they didn't. And I think that that gets replicated over and over again, and that makes me hopeful. I think that, you know, people often have ideas that that you know they've come to hold, but they don't hold them all that tightly, you know, they're open to being changed. And I think that we also live in a time where, you know, at some level, a lot of people are very hungry for community, and that can be, you know, exploited in ways that are not so great, you know, like you know, nationalism and ugly things like that. But you know, what I find is that desire for community can really transcend ideology and lead to getting to know folks in ways that build understanding across barriers. So, you know, I think it's just important to look beyond ideology to the things that make us human and identify with each other, and that there's always potential to reach across that.
So I wanted to start by first thanking Pastor Rich Lang for having us here. It's really an honor to be here. And I think it's very apt that we are talking about these things right after the elections, because it's very important not for us to not lose the momentum of our activism and our political thinking after being engaged so actively. We don't want to just go home and, you know, just go back to life as usual, because there's a lot that needs to be done. And I think in terms of the question that was asked, yes, there has been a very deep divide and polarization in society. I think the election results, the presidential election results are showing that there is a deep political, social polarization in society. There has been a growth of bigotry, and it's a really important thing for us to think about. But I think underneath the polarization that was demonstrated through the electoral through the electoral arena in the presidential campaign, underneath that lies the real polarization of our society, which is class polarization. So if you look at the real divide that exists in American society, that exists between the super rich and everyone else, and there is any number of statistics that we can look at, but one really striking, I'll probably give you more statistics because I'm an economist and I can't help it, but one really striking number is that if you look at the growth of productivity every year, for the last several decades, it is just skyrocketing. But if you look at the wages of virtually everybody except for the top sliver of the one, or even not just the 1%, but the top 1/10 of 1%, except for them, if you look at everybody else, wages are mostly stagnant. And for a lot of people, wages in real terms are falling. So where is that whole, huge chunk of wealth that was created by everybody, all ordinary working people going? That's obviously flowing to the top. It's not going down some black hole and disappearing, right? So what does that mean? That actually means, in terms of numbers, that every year, for the last several years, $1 trillion are flowing to the top 1%, whereas the rest of us are are being told to make do with crumbs. And I think that while we are talking about the polarization of society, we need to recognize that that is the real polarization that is occurring in our society, and that is what we should be talking about. And if we are talking about cultural values and polarization in social terms, then let's look at several issues. Let's look at women's rights. Let's look at the need for universal single-payer healthcare, the need for welfare for the poor and services for the homeless, the need for childcare, publicly provided childcare, the need for publicly funded high-quality education. If you look at the ending the wars, taxing the rich, you look at any social or economic issue and pick up opinion polls. I would encourage you to go to fair.org, Fairness and Accuracy in Reporting. They have several, a whole range of polls, and what it shows is not a deeply polarized society. It actually shows a deeply united society. What it shows is that ordinary working people are actually looking for the same thing, which is social and economic justice, a decent standard of living. Look at the polls on climate change. It is very clear that a majority of people are becoming more and more aware of the dangerous path towards which the system is taking us, and the need for radical change in the use of renewable energy. Look at the polls on wars. So I think what's happening here is that you have Obama and Romney, the Democratic Party and the Republican Party, neither of which are offering any real alternative. And in the absence of that real alternative, people are being, led down the garden path by one party or another. Both parties are actually doing equally to distort the real issues and abuse them, use them for their own benefit. And the problem here, and I'll end with this, is that if the Democratic Party is what is considered the left, then we are in real trouble here, because then we are really left with a very false choice. The choice is between very quickly going down a very bad path or less quickly going down a very bad path. And that's where the left comes in. We have to create our own alternative.
I'm actually feeling very hopeful after the election. I mean, I work with homeless folks, and I believe in harm reduction. If you're going to shoot heroin use a clean needle, you know. So if you're going to vote in a presidential election, you know, for God's sake, vote Obama, you know. Don't vote Romney, you know, but you know, it's just trying to do the least harm there, and that's valid. You know, you get to live to fight another day. But you know, to extend the analogy, you know, if you're shooting with a clean needle, odds are you're a heroin addict. And I think that's kind of, you know, that's us. And, you know, we're addicted to consumer culture, and we're addicted to distractions, and we're addicted to a bunch of trivia that really isn't doing us a lot of good. And we sort of, you know, we miss the big picture. I think, you know, I had this kind of joke that I was telling my friends before the election, you know, that, you know, when I'm going to have my president lie to me, you know, I want sort of big, hegemonic, you can't handle the truth lies, as opposed to sort of little tawdry, I'm lying to you because I think you're stupid lies. And that's why I'm voting for President Obama. And, you know, I mean, I think no matter which one of them is getting into, which one of them, you know, is president, you know, we still have wars of empire. We still have a sort of an overall neoliberal framework that we're operating within. We're still going to have this culture that's been inculcated for decades. We're even in a state, you know, in a state that overwhelmingly goes democratic. We simultaneously vote to give tax breaks that the legislature tried to take away from corporations back to them. You know, we're like, no, really, we want you to have this money. You know, so that's a long-term project, changing that culture. I mean, the right has been building this sort of anti-tax, anti-government culture for 3 decades, and we're not going to shift it in one election. But I was, you know, very encouraged by, you know, the kind of rhetoric that was in this election, even though Obama never mentioned, oh, I don't know, homelessness, for example. You know, he was still talking about our responsibility to each other and the role of government, and shifting the dialogue around that, as opposed to that other asshole who is just, you know, everybody for themselves, and you know, it's Blade Runner time. So, but you know, the reason I'm hopeful is just simply, you know, part of it's just demographics. You know, I mean, voters are getting younger, and you know, there have been people that have been fighting the good fight year after year and losing, who are now starting to win. I mean, gay marriage passed in 4 states. That's huge. Obama won Florida. I mean, after everything that they've done to, you know, steal the vote in racist ways in that state, and all of the ways that they have, like, set him up to lose, he won Florida, and that was demographics. That was the shift. That was, you know, there just ain't enough white guys around anymore for the Republican Party to continue to lean on them as really their sole base, you know? So I think that is very, very hopeful. You know, I wrote this speech. I'm running out of reasons for hope, but I had more. Women, exactly. You know, there was a big backlash to some very, very stupid things that some very stupid people said, and it kind of comes down to that not enough white guys to go around thing anymore. Like what's going on in communities like Cleveland and Detroit, these economically devastated communities where business enterprises are bubbling up from, you know, people who are organizing of necessity because they have to create their own opportunities, and all of these sort of like green businesses are getting created, and these worker-run co-ops are getting created, and I think that there's a lot going on there that is really kind of creating, you know, in grandiose terms, it's kind of creating a new economic model as capitalism in some ways becomes less viable long term. So I think that there are new models for organizing and new models for business and new models for you know, really free enterprise that are being created that are neither really, you know, pure capitalism or socialism. It's something different that's being created, and I think that is really hopeful. I see hope in the emergence of the Occupy movement over the last year. I think that, you know, I mean, it's hard to say, but it's, you know, not a tough case to make that really putting class and inequality and the deep economic divisions in America front and center and having that be a very popular debate, you know, opened political space for a different sort of national dialogue around this election. I think, you know, the Occupy movement had a lot to do with that. You know, I think when you look at the history of social movements, you don't see movements coming out of people organizing out of altruism or organizing because, you know, they're better people than the rest of us. You know, you see people who are organizing because they need to, because they're threatened, because there are survival issues that bring people into action, and, you know, there is choice involved, but in some ways there isn't. And I think that we're seeing a lot of that now. I mean, things are getting awfully real out there. You know, like the work that we're doing with homeless folks whose needs are unmet by not just the sort of human services system, but, you know, there isn't enough shelter for homeless people in Seattle. Last year, in the one-night count, there were 2,594 people counted outside after the shelters were full. And we've been organizing over the last year to support folks who are in the tent cities, saying that we need to do more to meet the unmet need that's out there, and that you cannot have a purely human services solution to what is an economic justice issue. That, you know, human services are important, that mitigates the misery to somewhat, but there is a onslaught that is going on. One of the most shocking things that I heard, I was at the Committee to End Homelessness governing board meeting a couple of weeks ago, and they were going through their little sort of board dashboard, their board dashboard, and they were looking at all the, you know, signs of progress and how they're licking homelessness, even though, you know, the number of homeless people in King County has gone up by 33% since they started their plan. And they had all these, you know, kind of, you know, metrics, and some of them looked rather hopeful. And then they came to, and they had created some 5,000 units of housing over the last 6 years, which is, you know, laudable. But then they, you know, guess how many people became homeless for the first time last quarter over the last 3 months? 175 families and 1,000 individuals they counted in their system through their own, you know, HMIS database system. 1,000 people in the last 3 months homeless for the first time. You know, economic reasons that people are becoming homeless is just utterly trumping the human services response. And people are fighting back because they have to, and they're fighting back saying we need an economic justice response, not a human services response that is entirely inadequate. And we need to support those movements because those are the sorts of survival movements that I think in the end are going to build the change, the movements for social change that are going to turn things around.
Thank you for speaking. I really agree with a lot of things that Tim just said. It's true that, it's absolutely true that, a Romney presidency would, I think, in many real ways have been a far worse option. But let's be clear: an Obama presidency is not actually in any way going to offer any solutions. And I think this is the problem with this two-party system. And I wanted to say that as a socialist, I am also hopeful, but I'm extremely hopeful. But my hope is not based on this idea that now suddenly, for example, in the case of Obama, that now he has he doesn't have to worry about re-election. Suddenly he's going to come out of the closet and declare himself as a socialist and actually start doing what we want him to do. I know that is not going to happen, and I think we should all understand that as long as we have this misplaced faith in this two-party system, we're actually not going to get anywhere. And we have to understand that these problems that Tim was talking about, as he was correctly hinting at, these are systemic problems. Poverty and unemployment and homelessness are endemic to capitalism. And if we don't actually organize a really concerted fight back against the system itself, then we are never going to solve those problems. I think Tim very eloquently talked about how the social services are never going to be able to keep up with the problems that are that we're facing. I mean, the simple reality that we're facing right now is that since the economic collapse, all the burden of that economic collapse, which ordinary people did not create, is on the backs of ordinary people. The census is reporting that 1 in 2 Americans is either in poverty or inching closer. So we have to look for solutions outside this two-party system and recognize that the two parties, the two corporate parties are merely tools for the capitalist system in the United States to keep the status quo. And in order to solve those problems, we have to come out of that agenda. And I'm pretty sure that Democrats, you heard them say before, and I'm sure you'll hear them again today and other times, that we can't be pie in the sky, we have to get things done, these are all dreams, this is great, but we have to live in the real world. And I think if we believe that poverty and homelessness and unemployment are going to be solved by voting for the Democrats, then that's pie in the sky. We have to recognize that. And every time there was a social movement that wanted to address the desperate ills and misery of society, they were called dreamers. The abolitionists, the first day, do you think they built a movement in the first day? No, they had to really struggle. And the first day, a lot of people were arguing with them, this is pie in the sky, why don't you just fight for kinder, gentler slavery? This is the message of the Democratic Party. We have no option but to fight the fight for the corporations, be loyal to them. And while doing that, if we give you a few crumbs, then that's the best we can get. We have to reject that false choice. And the way you reject it is through concrete action. And that action comes on the streets, as Tim was talking about. That came with the civil rights movement. That came right now. A very live example is the enormously successful struggle that the Chicago Teachers Union had recently against a Democratic Party establishment that was led by Rahm Emanuel, that was determined to really crush the teachers' union. But what they did was organize a strike. They actually had parents and teachers, children, students having school occupations, and they showed the way. They showed that really the only way to address these problems in the system is to challenge that itself. And action comes in other ways as well. And I will look to our campaign that has recently, that recently ended, that as an example of what people can do. I mean, if you think about it, we ran an openly socialist grassroots, people power campaign on a shoestring budget. We had less than a tenth of the budget that the Democratic Party had.
Against the most powerful man in the legislature.
Against the most powerful legislator in Olympia, against the most powerful man in the state. Yes, this is true. And you know, some people were pretty sort of stunned at our boldness, but this is real. Look at the results. We got, you know, as of today, 27.59% of the votes. That is more than 13,000 people in the district. And these votes did not come because we watered down our socialist ideas or said that, well, let's fight for little things. No. If you look at our election program, we are actually calling for free education, free public transit. We're talking about so many things, police accountability, a massive jobs program. So the question is, do we think that did we think that we were all going to achieve all that just by running this campaign? No. But the point is that we have to go out there with a message that really sets people's sights higher and says, you know, this is what we can achieve. But the way you achieve is by having a systematic you know, series of movements, a series of struggles, and bringing people together, drawing a broader layer of people together. And I completely agree with Tim. The Occupy movement was a huge inspiration. In fact, our campaign is an Occupy-inspired campaign. That's, you know, that's where we came from because, you know, Occupy really changed the dialogue. But what we need in the coming years is Occupy times 10, Occupy times 100. Occupy times 1,000. We need movements of millions of people on the street because history has shown that that is what brings about a change. But you know, that's all in the abstract because we don't know which movements exactly will break out. We have to, you know, keep our ear to the ground and follow that. But we also have to be actively involved in struggle. And one of the things that we are pointing out towards is based on the enormous success of our socialist campaign, you know, election campaign that just ended, we don't want the chapter to be closed there. We actually want that to be the opening salvo of better and greater things to come. And a concrete thing that we're proposing is that in Seattle in 2013, we run a slate of left candidates against the Democratic Party, you know, establishment. And we are calling on many forces on the left to come together. I mean, you know, I see other socialists here, not just Socialist Alternative. I see the Green Party here. I see other people from the left. I see people from Occupy that I've known. It's so wonderful to see you all here. That's the kind of, you know, collective effort we need. And that's what we are proposing. Let's run a slate of candidates for the Seattle City Council races, for the mayoral race. Let's open up the agenda. Let's really open the floodgates to really completely change the dialogue. And we've been proposing this for several weeks, but I think we are now, you know, it's in a totally different, I mean, let's be clear. The vote that we have just got is historic. This is a game changer. Let's not, you know, let's not just be casual about this, you know, like this is a great idea, you know, let's mull over it. No, this is the time for action. 2013 will be a dramatic year, and Tim made a really excellent point, which is that people are forced into struggle by the circumstances that they face. And those circumstances are going to intensify next year. You know, let's not kid ourselves, the economic crisis hasn't gone anywhere, it is going to worsen. We're going to have the fiscal cliff question coming up in January. There are going to be bigger and deeper attacks on education, on healthcare, on social services. We have to fight on all those fronts. Already we are seeing explosive issues in student debt and the foreclosure crisis, where already 5 million you know, households, homes have been foreclosed on, and they're predicting that another 8 to 10 million schools are going to be foreclosed on, homes are going to be foreclosed on. In the state of Washington, you know, it's amazing, you know, it's great that Ref 74 passed. It's also great that the marijuana initiative passed. But we also have to be clear, the charter schools amendment, you know, initiative also passed, which is not good. And I think what has happened in Chicago, to the Chicago schools, should give us a taste of the future of what will happen if we allow the neoliberal, you know, privatization agenda that was mentioned earlier to take over our public schools. So what we need is to call on the left, call on the labor movement, call on rank and file union activists, union leaders, challenge them. Stop being tied at the hip to the Democratic Party, because what has it got you? You're pouring hundreds of millions of dollars into the Democratic Party. You're releasing thousands of foot soldiers to stump for them. And what are we getting in return? As a state employee myself, I can tell you through personal experience, we're getting battered. We're not even getting cost of living increases. And there are worse attacks to come. So what is the solution to all this? The concrete solution immediately is to break from this two-party system and begin to create a mass political alternative nationally, not just in this city. And we're hoping that this call for a slate of left candidates in Seattle will prove to be an inspiration and a stepping stone for what should be happening nationally. Nationally, we should be building a mass party of the 99%, a mass working class party. That has to be on the agenda, and I think it is on the agenda right now. And we have to find that way forward. And I think I need to wrap up, but I just wanted to say that for people who think that Americans are conservative and Americans are obsessed with consumerism, I want to give you a really interesting perspective. I don't know if you've thought about this before in this way, but if you actually look at the statistics, if you look at the deep poverty and misery that exists in the United States, if you look at child homelessness, if you look at the number of jobs a large majority of single moms work, if you see how much they work 2 or 3 jobs, we actually have a crisis where people are actually not getting access to the things that they really need. We have the opposite crisis. We have the crisis where people don't have proper housing, they don't have a safe environment, they don't have good quality schools, they don't have good quality health care that they can access for free, we don't have good roads, we don't have mass transit. I mean, this is a shame. This is a disgrace in the wealthiest country in the world. So I think instead of looking at it as a consumerist culture, we should have the opposite view that we really need to create, really need to push for mass movements that will enable the working class to have those material, be able to afford those material needs.
I'm really pleased that Tim is hopeful, because real change, that concept, is a brilliant concept, and it is truly inspiring. And you took a real situation, provided a key idea, and then made it work. I mean, it's just a beautiful concept, and you've done so well. Can we hear it for real change, if you don't mind? So we need to... Oh, yeah. I think one of the things we got to do is focus in on real solutions that address real human need. And let me give you probably the primo example why it was so important for Obama to win. They passed, despite its flaws, and if I was the president, I would certainly have passed a different law myself. But the health care law makes a real difference in real people's lives. And we're talking about literally 600,000 more people who have health care because of that act in Washington State. And that's on top of the about almost 800,000 that we have with our Alpha Health program, so that all the kids in the state have health care. Now, 10 years ago, that wasn't the case. Now it is. Every kid in the state can have health care. In the state that the ones that are provided by the state are actually run through a single payer system, for that matter. So this expansion of Medicaid is extremely important. Had Romney won, they would have repealed it. That's what his platform was on day one. He said that he was going to actually repeal a lot of things on day one, so I don't know how many hours are in his day, but that's a clear, tangible example between the Republicans and the Democrats, and why it was so important to have Obama win. And I appreciate, Rich, your article there where you endorsed Obama in terms of this election means that much. The next thing we need to do is build a broader coalition, and as an example of that is Referendum 74. Those of us in the legislature worked step by step by step against the right-wing agenda. When I got into the legislature, one of the first things Republicans did was pass the Defense of Marriage Act, the DOMA law. in a very hateful way. Ed Murray and myself and others fought back against that, and eventually we got enough of a majority to start reversing that right-wing trend. And we passed some civil rights legislation and anti-discrimination legislation, anti-bullying, anti-hate crimes, step by step, and then with domestic partnerships, and then with full marriage equality. And I'm so proud of this state that we passed it with a very strong vote there. It's the first state in the nation to repeal the Defense of Marriage Act and enact full marriage equality. And so we need to take a moment actually to celebrate that, the years of effort that went into it. So if you can send a note to Ed Murray or Jamie Peterson or some of the other ones who are key to that, I think they'd appreciate it because it was not easy. The other thing we do is we need to build a broader coalition with the labor movement. It was very, very important in this state that we start unionizing new people in the workforce. That's why I started at Fremont Public Association, which I used to be the director of. We organized the Home Care Workers Union. It started out with 100 people through OPIU, Local 8. And then step by step through SEIU, the Service Employees International Union, it got unionized to now it's up to about 42,000 people. Real wages, real people, and a real difference in their lives. Consequently, they helped enormously to try to pass Referendum 74 and many other things. We're going to need that kind of mass movement among the labor folks to work together with us to do the right thing, get the job done.
Help me if I get this question wrong. One of the things I hear is I hear Kshama talking about the need for an activized citizenry who are consistent with their values and don't want to enter into the compromised arena of incremental change. And I think of Eugene Debs, and I think of the early movements at the turn of last century. And without those movements, you know, probably FDR's reforms were inconceivable. And so I hear you, Kshama, that you're at the forefront of trying to build a new socialist movement here in Seattle that will stay true to those values in the face of, I mean, we are a liberal city. I have lived in Spokane. It's not the same. We're in a liberal city and in a blue state. And so on this end, we have a man of liberal values in a liberal party. And
an adjective term, liberal, by the way. So.
My question is going to be if you define it. We have a person who has come out of the Seattle ethos, who has understood what's going on the streets, who has helped to alleviate those streets, who works in a legislative system, who has to make compromises, has to work for incremental change, because otherwise nothing gets done. And Tim, as I see it, you're also in the middle of this because you also have to work both of those, you know, you have to organize people without power to achieve some power, and then you have to work with the powerful simply to fund the organization that helps the powerless achieve a voice. So what I'd like you just to address, just for a couple minutes before we break into groups, is how do you personally deal with those values compromises that each of you have to struggle with?
Well, I can start there. I mean, actually, using an example, it was very important for the tent city movement to start in this city. We helped organize that back in the early 80s with Scott Morrow, David Bloom, and John Fox. It was through actually a federal grant we got for the Displacement Coalition. Those are the first three guys I hired. Well, Scott Morrow then went on to organize Tent City to keep alive that, what do you want to call it, disgust that we should have about anybody being homeless in this society. And so oftentimes they will make the public statement with the tent city occupation, and also in some churches. I appreciate the churches have been very helpful in that, and so have some other organizations, obviously. Because we need to really focus in on what the real situation is. People don't have homes. So I'd like to work with you, Tim. I don't know you as well as I should, because I agree with you in terms of rapid housing for people. Get them homes right away. And so we need to come up with a strategy about that. We do a lot in response to the 10-city challenge to the society. We fund a lot through the Housing Trust Fund. We fund programs like this, Roots here in this church here, and a lot of other organizations. But I agree, the social service system is not the answer to this. And so you got to combine both, making a very strong statement, like 10 cities, and then also solutions that will then drive actual accomplishments. I just give you an example out of Sandpoint. I helped organize the folks out there to build housing. There's going to be 200 units of housing for the homeless, primarily homeless families. That would not have happened had we not drawn attention to the injustice of homelessness in the society. But then we followed up with specific proposals. This many buildings, here they are, here's how we finance it and get the job done. So that's the combination. You've got to combine both. You can't just say one or the other. If you're one-dimensional, well, you only see one thing. You have to be multidimensional from all across the board in order to affect real social change.
I think for me, I very much feel this daily tension between extreme urgency and utter patience, because I see it as very, very much a long-term fight, and I've gotten very used to the idea that the world as it is isn't necessarily the world as I would like it to be, and that is simply reality. I think that Obama is a center Democrat. You could make the argument that Richard Nixon was more progressive than Barack Obama, and yet at the same time, it is also true that Barack Obama is probably the most progressive president capable of being elected in the United States at this moment, and that is just the way it is. The right hasn't created the atmosphere that, sort of enshrines freedom from taxation and the, sort of badness of government that needs to get off our backs. That didn't happen overnight. That was, a 30, 40-year project of creating that consensus. And, I think that it's cracking. I think that it no longer holds. I think that neoliberalism itself is starting to crack, and the contradictions within that are widening and breaking, and there's hope in that. But nonetheless, there is a process of bringing people along that doesn't happen overnight, and that we need to be patient with that, and at the same time be urgent about the reality that exists and needs to be addressed. And one of the things that drives me insane is how, for example, used to homelessness people have become. Resigned to homelessness as this sort of permanent structural fact of our economy. We ought to all be walking around, running around like our hair is on fire over the fact that there are 3,000 people who are going to be sleeping outside in King County tonight because there isn't even room for them in the shelter system. That is outrageous. None of us should allow ourselves to get used to that idea. But, at the same time, we know that that's not going to change overnight, and we need to build that case, we need to build that movement, and that's work that doesn't go as quickly as we would like it to, but we also, we don't know, none of us has a crystal ball. And, we see time and time again where in social change movements there are sudden shifts where things become possible that didn't appear possible before. For myself, I, day to day, my barometer isn't so much, am I winning today? Am I losing today? My barometer is, am I being truthful? Am I living with integrity? am I living a life that's worth living? And, you know, I think that if that is the foundation from which we're engaging, you know, the questions about, you know, are we winning, are we losing, eventually those start to take care of themselves.
So I think Tim said something that really struck a chord with me because it's my own personal experience. You know, he was saying that if you think about the fact that there are 3,000 homeless people in a wealthy city like Seattle, you should be so troubled about it. It's like your hair is on fire. I can totally relate to that many times over because I grew up in India, and my earliest memories were of just this ocean of poverty and misery. And that is what exists, you know, for most of the people outside the United States. I mean, there's any number of facts you could think about. I mean, the millions of people going hungry and dying simply because they don't have any food to eat, while there is so much food that it is rotting in the granaries. This is the insanity of this system. It's true. And I can also identify with what he was saying, this combination of this feeling of extreme urgency and then also, you know, really utmost patience. That is actually, I think, if you wanted to sum up the life of a socialist activist, that pretty much sums it up. Because we recognize correctly that, you know, what we want is not going to change today. So we have to have patience to, you know, win over win over the millions who we know we are going to win them over. But it is going to take time. It is going to take a lot of patience, and it's going to take a lifetime of dedication. But we have to recognize that it has to go in the right direction. I mean, in my personal view, we don't define being patient as endlessly working with the Democratic Party or within that the two-party system, which we know is not going to help us. I mean, in any other science, you're actually going to use evidence, you know, from the past, and then decide what does most of the evidence indicate. You know, if 99.999% of the evidence indicates a certain way, then you will say, okay, you know, let's go the other way. But that's the approach we have to use in politics as well. Why are we so, why do we have such blinders in our, around our eyes that we think that endlessly supporting the Democratic Party, endlessly voting for a Democrat is actually going to change things? And yes, we are socialists. We don't hide that fact. We have a certain view of what should replace this system of capitalism. And I invite each and every one of you to have discussions and debates with us to know more about what we mean by socialism, by democratic socialism. And we also believe very strongly that it's not enough merely to have a critique of capitalism, but you also have to have an alternative. You know, if not capitalism, then what? And that's the viewpoint that we are offering. And we did not create this viewpoint. It has existed for a number of years. But we think that it presents a very concrete alternative to capitalism. But if you were to ask me that, are you willing to work with somebody in politics only if they're socialist at this moment? No. And that is what, you know, that is where the heart of the matter lies in this question that Rich has asked. You know, the question really is in other ways. I mean, I look at this question as, what is your definition of compromise? You know, how do you define compromise in political work? Yes, compromise is absolutely essential in political work because we have to find a way to work with people on the things that we agree with while we're still discussing and debating out the things that we don't agree on. But we have to understand what that compromise really means. So if by compromise somebody means that we are always going to carry out a corporate agenda and give you crumbs, that's not my definition of compromise. Look at what has happened in the state of Washington in the last several decades. Microsoft, which made $23 billion of profit in last year alone, pays nearly zero in taxes on its profits. And in the same time, the tuition for higher education has gone up by roughly 100%. That's doubling. That is not compromise. That is selling the working class down the river. So let's be clear what we mean by compromise. So just a very concrete example. We you know, I mean, just, you know, but, you know, just for a second, I mean, Rich mentioned Eugene Debs, and I think that's very apt in this case because, you know, we ran a socialist campaign and we won 27% of the vote. So I think, you know, Eugene Debs, if he were here, I'm sure he would be very happy. But the point is that if he or any other socialist was elected or is to be elected in the future, then that is the message that they're going to take forward. You know, what is our definition of compromise? If there was a bill, you know, just to concretely put it in the legislature, that was to increase the funding for higher education by 30%, yes, by all means, let's fight together to make that happen while knowing that the fight is much greater than that and it has to continue in the future. But that is not what's happening. Unfortunately, that is not what's happening. What is happening is that conditions for ordinary people, the elderly, the disabled, young people, students, public schools, teachers, janitors, conditions for all these people, conditions for us in the 99% are far worsening, and they're going to keep worsening. This is a slippery slope. The only way to break this path is to find an alternative to the two-party system. But, you know, I wouldn't necessarily define it in a rigid way that, you know, we are outside the system and they are in the system. I mean, we are working within the system. Unions, the formation of unions and fighting for collective bargaining and having strike action within capitalism, that's, you know, that's a compromise within capitalism. You know, what we need is socialism, of course, but we are, you know, we want to fight for the rights of workers within capitalism. So if you look at every step of the way, in the way the socialists fight for the working class, yes, we are making a compromise within the system, but it's a question of how you do it. What are the strategies you're using? Who are you building coalitions with? If you're building coalitions with the executives of the Building Industries Association of Washington and Microsoft and Boeing executives and Amazon and Starbucks, that's not coalition. I mean, that's coalition building of one kind, but that's not what we want. We want coalition building among the left. So we want to have coalitions of socialists and other people on the left who are sick and tired of the betrayal after betrayal of the Democratic Party and want to look for real solutions and want to work on a concrete agenda. And that is precisely what we're talking here. I mean, I hope everybody realizes that this is a really exciting moment. We're no longer talking about these things in the abstract. This has really happened. A socialist candidate is on the map. A socialist campaign, socialist agenda is on the map. An anti-capitalist agenda is on the map. So we need to really make use of that momentum and go forward. Yeah, I mean, I know there are lots of people who say that they're socially liberal and fiscally conservative, and often they mean stuff like, well, I'll support marriage equality, but I don't think there should be increase in funding for welfare or something like that. I think the reality is that the most effective way of building movements, and especially mass movements, you know, as we were talking in the group there, is to reach out to those people who have already, independent of us, started thinking about, you know, they have started questioning the system and have started thinking about, you know, what can we do here? You know, who are the most radicalizing members of the youth and of the, you know, of the community as a whole? And I think if we have that initial layer of people, you know, organized and ready to act on concrete actions, then a lot of those other people who call themselves, you know, whatever label, they may or may not join. But the point is that I don't think that our most fruitful efforts are going to be with people who may not agree with welfare. My point is that there are any number of people who are both socially liberal, you know, they will both support marriage equality and also will have a burning anger against poverty and homelessness. There are plenty of people, those people out there that we can reach. And I don't think we have to worry so much about reaching out to those other people. I mean, one of the weaknesses often of left groups or left, you know, alternatives, you know, and in a way, a little bit, Rocky Anderson was, you know, initially talking about this in this way, although later he wasn't. was that, I want to reach out to people on both the left and the right. And there is truth to that in the sense that a lot of the people who consider themselves right are really just looking for some options and haven't found the left yet. But on the other hand, there are lots of people who are already on the left, who are already, engaging with the issues, already, feel betrayed and feel completely demoralized by the system and are looking for options. And that's where our real, that's where the real power lies, and we should spend our energy looking for those people. Is your question, are you troubled by the term class warfare, or are you troubled by the fact that we're talking about class struggle? I think, yes, to the extent that there are, it's not just purely, economic misery that we're looking at. There is a lot of any number of social problems, social ills in our society. Look at the attacks on women's rights, on reproductive rights. Look at the attacks on LGBT rights. There's any number of social problems that we need to talk about. But, however, the reality is that a lot of these different forms of oppression that you see in society, racism, sexism, the oppression of the LGBT community, these are all stemming from an overall system of exploitation and oppression, and the system, the capitalist system. And ultimately, if we don't engage with the fact that there is a deep class polarization in society, we're not going to be able to bring people together. So in fact, if you look at how women originally won reproductive rights in the 60s and 70s in the United States, originally it was a relatively smaller but yet equally dedicated and committed group of middle class and slightly wealthier women who were out on the streets. Also, they had this approach of lobbying their legislators, writing letters saying, let's please expand rights for reproductive rights for women. But that was not when that wasn't when the movement really took off. The movement really took off when working class women, and women of color, lower income women, they got into the struggle, and they not only increased the numbers by many, many hundreds of thousands, but they also made a they also put a very, very important point on the agenda, which was that, well, what good is a right on paper going to do for me if I'm not going to be able to afford to get an abortion, afford to exercise my reproductive rights? And that's when the affordability of reproductive rights, having free public health care, those kinds of issues got clarified. So the reality is that we are facing a class warfare, and I'm not sure what your personal feelings are, but I would claim that the vast majority of the 99% who are on the receiving end of this battering, of the class warfare are very comfortable with that. They understand that we have to fight on the class basis. And a very inspiring example very recently is what is happening with Walmart workers. Has anybody been paying attention to that? Look out for Black Friday. They really are, organizing a struggle. And I went to one of these labor actions that was organized in Walmart, and we went inside and we were trying to talk to workers. You won't believe this. There were 5 or 7 different managers following us every step of the way, and we were asked to leave 3 times, and we had to ultimately leave because they threatened to call the cops. So you can imagine the kind of fear, the kind of fearful environment these workers are living in, and yet they're struggling against it. But they're not struggling because they hate the term class warfare. They're struggling because of class warfare, because they are at the receiving end of it, and they're determined to fight for their rights. And I think that is where you will see the most prominent struggles coming up. So thank you, Annalisa, for mentioning that. And yes, our campaign was endorsed by the Freedom Socialist Party and Radical Women, and that was extremely appreciated. In terms of the slate itself, I think that we will have to all the forces on the left that are interested in this initiative, we will need to come together and decide the terms on which we should be doing this. We're not trying to do this unilaterally. That's the whole purpose of this slate, to bring the different forces on the left together. But of course, there have to be some ground rules. So firstly, I wanted to mention that I think there's a sign-up sheet going around for people to sign up, not to become members of Socialist Alternative, but if you're interested in helping with this slate, there's going to be a lot of work to be done around it. So please sign up on that so that we can get in touch with you after this event. But in terms of how we would run, I think some basic ideas that we are thinking about are that we should have a broad, like you said, a united left slate where there are some primary requirements. The requirement is that we want people who have broken from the Democratic and Republican Party system. We don't want to merely act as a pressure group for the Democrats. We want to actually we want that to sow the seeds for a genuine mass political alternative for the 99%, and so we have to do it on those terms. Meaning, we want people who are clear about that. And we also want, because we want it to be a broad left slate, we want to be able for all the candidates or all the campaigns to be free, once we agree on certain basic ground rules, to be free to present their own politics. So for example, if socialists are running in the slate alongside other non-socialists, but other people on the left who may not identify as socialists but have broken from the two-party system, then both of those candidates should be independently able to present their political voice in their political program, and things of that nature. So that's the sort of united left alliance we're talking about.
This is, the format is limited here, obviously due to time and energy. But one of the things I did want to share is Kshama and I haven't set the date yet, but I know that she's going to come back to the Common Good hopefully early in the year, which I think would be a wonderful time, if nothing else, for you to be able to do a primer on socialism. What is the social? I'm following up on your question there. What is the socialist agenda?
That's my favorite thing to talk about.
And I suspect you talk about it well. There was one more, and if you can have the last question, and then we'll break it down.
In terms of the previous question about what are the terms on which we are organizing the left slate, this is perhaps an obvious point, but I want to go ahead and say it anyway. The key word is left there. We want a united left slate. We don't want Tea Party people who have broken from the two-party system to come and join us. So it's a left agenda.
Thank you all for coming.